You need to understand sometimes avoidants do not come back because they suddenly became emotionally ready, healed, self-aware, and capable of giving you the kind of love you always deserved. Sometimes they come back because life has finally shown them what they could not see when they had you, that what you gave was rare, steady, sincere, and far more difficult to replace than they ever imagined. That is the painful truth, and it is also the truth that so many people need to hear, because when someone leaves you while you were loving them with honesty, patience, and depth, it is easy to believe that maybe what you gave was not that special. Maybe it was too much. Maybe it was not enough. Maybe it was ordinary. But the truth is, rare things are often misjudged by people who do not yet have the maturity to recognize them. When you were there, your love may have felt normal to them, not because it was ordinary, but because you gave it so consistently. Your understanding became something they could lean on. Your patience became something they assumed would always be available. Your emotional depth became something they could visit without fully appreciating what it cost you to keep showing up that way. And this is what happens far too often in relationships with avoidant people. They do not always understand the value of safe love while they are inside it. While they are receiving it, it can feel overwhelming, exposing, almost threatening, because healthy love asks them to step closer than their fears want to let them. Healthy love asks them to be seen. Healthy love asks them to be consistent. Healthy love asks them to stop hiding behind distance and finally meet someone in the middle. And for someone who has built their life around emotional self-protection, that can feel terrifying. So, they pull away, they tell themselves stories, they say the timing is wrong, they say they need space, they say they feel pressure, they say they are confused, and maybe some part of that is true. Maybe they really do feel overwhelmed, maybe they really do fear intimacy. But what they often do not realize in that moment is that the very thing they are stepping away from, the very thing they are calling too much, is actually the rare thing they will search for later in places that cannot hold them the same way. They think they are escaping pressure, but what they are really walking away from is a kind of love that is difficult to find in a world where so many people do not know how to stay. Then life begins teaching them what your presence used to hide. Life introduces contrast. Life removes your softness from the equation. Life stops cushioning them with your understanding. And suddenly, the world they stepped back into does not feel as freeing as they expected. It feels colder. It feels emptier. It feels less real. They start meeting people who are emotionally unavailable in a different way, people who do not care enough to even try, people who are casual with connection, careless with words, shallow with effort, interested only in convenience, not commitment. They start experiencing what it feels like when warmth is not there, when patience is not there, when someone does not try to understand the parts of them they themselves struggle to explain. And that is when your value begins to rise in their memory, not because you changed, but because distance finally gave them perspective. Your steadiness, which once felt easy to overlook, starts to look extraordinary. Your emotional honesty, which once may have felt intense to them, starts to look mature. Your consistency, which they may have taken for granted, starts to look rare. They begin to realize that what you offered was not common. It was not something they could just walk away from and find again in the next person, or the next conversation, or the next temporary distraction. It was not just affection, it was substance. It was care with intention. It was patience with depth. It was love that had both heart and integrity. And there is something deeply tragic about that kind of realization arriving too late, because by the time they begin to understand your rarity, you have already paid the price of being misunderstood. You have already cried the tears they did not see. You have already carried the questions they never answered. You have already spent nights wondering why your love felt invisible to someone who seemed to matter so much to you. You have already had to sit with the pain of being deeply present with someone who kept choosing emotional distance. So when they start to see your worth later, it does not erase what it cost you to survive the version of them who could not recognize it in real time. Still, you need to understand this part too. Their return is not always proof of transformation. Sometimes it is only proof of recognition. Sometimes they come back because they miss what you gave, not because they have become capable of giving something equal in return. Sometimes they come back because life has humbled them, because they have discovered that your patience was rare, your softness was rare, your effort was rare, but missing something rare is not the same as being ready to protect it. Recognizing value is one thing. honoring it is another. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because a person can come back full of feeling, full of nostalgia, full of regret, and still be carrying the same patterns that once broke your heart. That is why your healing matters so much, because if you do not heal, their return will feel like validation. It will feel like proof that you were right to wait, right to hope, right to keep the door cracked open in your mind. But healing teaches you something deeper. Healing teaches you that your rarity was never dependent on whether they returned to acknowledge it. Healing teaches you that your worth was present even when they could not see it. Healing teaches you that someone's delayed understanding of your value does not obligate you to reopen the same chapter, because you are not here to simply be remembered. You are here to be cherished. You are not here to be the person someone finally appreciates after losing. You are here to be loved properly while you are still standing there with your heart open. And maybe that is the deepest lesson in all of this. Sometimes life really does show them that you were rare. Sometimes it does bring them back with a new awareness, with a new ache, with a new understanding of what they lost. But the most important thing is not whether life teaches them your value. The most important thing is whether life has taught you your own. Because once you truly understand how rare you are, you stop waiting for someone else's realization to become the mirror that tells you who you are. You stop measuring your worth by who comes back. You stop confusing being missed with being loved well, and you begin choosing relationships where your depth is not a lesson someone learns too late, but a gift someone recognizes while they still have the chance to hold it with care. You need to understand they often recognize your value more deeply in your absence, when your warmth is no longer there to soften their confusion, when your presence is no longer there to make distance feel safe, and when the silence they once created no longer feels like control, but loss. That is the part so many people miss. When you were there, loving them, trying for them, understanding them, giving them room, giving them patience, giving them one more chance to explain, one more chance to show up, one more chance to be different. They could live inside your love without fully seeing it. Your care became the background music of their life. Your steadiness became the quiet thing they assumed would always remain. Your softness became the cushion beneath every emotional retreat. And because it was always there, because you kept being there, they did not have to face what your absence would actually mean. That is what absence does. It removes comfort. And in removing comfort, it reveals value. While you were present, they could tell themselves many stories. They could call you emotional. They could say the connection felt intense. They could convince themselves they just needed space or time or less pressure or fewer expectations. They could make your desire for clarity sound like demand, your need for consistency sound like heaviness, your wish for emotional honesty sound like something they were not ready for. And perhaps, in their own fearful way, they believed those stories. Perhaps they truly thought distance was the solution. Perhaps they believed that if they could just step back, the tension inside them would disappear. But what they often do not understand is that your presence was never the real problem. The problem was the discomfort inside them that your love exposed. Because real love exposes. It exposes fear. It exposes avoidance. It exposes every place where a person has learned to survive instead of connect. And if someone has spent years learning how to keep one foot out the door, your consistency can feel confronting. Your sincerity can feel dangerous. Your emotional depth can feel like a mirror they do not want to stand in front of for too long. So they back away, not always because they do not care, but because caring asks more of them than distance does. Distance lets them breathe without growing. Distance lets them feel in control. Distance lets them avoid the terrifying work of being fully present. And while they are choosing that distance, you are left carrying the ache of someone who wanted to be close, but kept being treated like closeness itself was the problem. Then life begins to move. Days pass, weeks pass, sometimes months. The noise that once distracted them starts to fade. The relief they felt in leaving starts to thin out. The world keeps showing them people, conversations, moments, and connections, but none of them feel quite the same. Not because you were perfect, but because what you gave had substance. What you gave had emotional weight. What you gave was not shallow, not convenient, not careless. It was real. And reality has a strange way of becoming clearer in hindsight. They begin to notice what other people do not offer. They begin to feel what your absence has removed. They begin to understand that your warmth was not ordinary. It was stabilizing. It was generous. It was rare. They start to remember the way you listened, not just to their words, but to the pain beneath their words. They remember how you tried to understand even when they struggled to explain themselves. They remember how you gave grace where most people would have walked away much sooner. They remember the emotional safety they once called pressure. They remember the consistency they once called too much. They remember the love they could have rested in if only they had known how to stop running from it. And now, with your warmth gone, life becomes colder in ways they did not predict. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is a random moment at night, a conversation with someone else that feels empty, a hollow interaction that reminds them what depth actually felt like. Sometimes it is the realization that attention is easy to find, but genuine care is not. Chemistry is easy to find, but emotional safety is not. Company is easy to find, but being truly understood is not. That is when your absence starts teaching them what your presence never could. Because when you were there, they could lean on your love while still resisting it. They could enjoy your care while still questioning it. They could keep you close enough to feel held, but far enough to avoid responsibility. But absence changes that. Absence removes the luxury of half connection. Absence removes the comfort of knowing you are still there. Absence forces them to sit with themselves, without your patience smoothing the edges of their confusion. And in that space, your value becomes louder, not because you are speaking, but because silence often says what words could never make them hear. And yet, this is where your heart must become wise, because someone recognizing your value in your absence is deeply emotional, but it is not always enough. It can touch the part of you that longed to be seen. It can stir the ache that wanted them to finally understand. It can make you feel that all the waiting, all the tears, all the confusion somehow meant something, because now they see it, now they feel it, now they know you were rare. But you must be careful here, because being recognized is not the same as being cherished, and being missed is not the same as being loved in the way you deserve. Sometimes they return because absence has made them lonely, because life has shown them contrast, because they finally feel the weight of losing something rare. But that does not automatically mean they have become capable of holding what they lost. A person can miss your warmth and still not know how to stop bringing coldness into your life. A person can admire your depth and still not know how to meet you there. A person can feel regret and still not have the courage to love differently. That is why your healing matters more than their realization, because healing teaches you not to be hypnotized by late understanding. Healing teaches you to ask harder questions. Not, do they miss me, but can they love me with consistency now? Not, do they finally see my worth, but are they ready to honor it? Not, did absence teach them a lesson, but have they changed enough that loving them would no longer cost me myself? And there is something deeply human in wanting them to know. Of course you wanted them to know. Of course some part of your heart wanted life to show them what you were when they could not see it themselves. That longing is natural. It comes from the pain of being misread, from the grief of giving something beautiful and watching it be handled carelessly. But your deepest healing begins when their delayed recognition stops being the thing you need in order to move on. Your deepest healing begins when you realize that your value did not begin in their realization, and it does not end in their absence. Your warmth was rare before they understood it. Your love was rare before life showed them. Your heart was rare even in the moments when it felt unseen. So yes, sometimes they recognize your value more deeply when you are gone, when your warmth is no longer there to cushion their fear, when your love is no longer available to make emotional distance feel safe. Yes, sometimes absence becomes the teacher that presence could never be. But the most important lesson is not the one life teaches them. It is the one life teaches you that you are too rare to keep offering yourself to someone who only understands your worth once they no longer have access to it, and that real love is not just about being remembered beautifully after you are gone. It is about being held carefully while you are still there. You need to understand what shocks them is not just losing you. It is realizing that real connection, patience, emotional depth, and genuine care are far rarer than they assumed when they had you. That is the part that arrives late for so many avoidant people. While you are there, loving them in real time, showing up with your whole heart, trying to understand them even when they struggle to understand themselves, they often do not fully see what is in front of them. Not because what you gave was small, but because what you gave was steady. It was there so consistently that they mistook it for something ordinary. They treated your warmth like it was common, your patience like it was replaceable, your emotional honesty like it was something they could walk away from and find again later, somewhere else, in someone else, at some other time. But life has a way of correcting that illusion. When you are dealing with someone avoidant, they often leave carrying a false sense of relief. The closeness that once felt overwhelming is suddenly gone. The conversations they were avoiding are no longer waiting for them. The vulnerability they feared no longer has to be faced. And at first, that space can feel like freedom. It can feel like they made the right choice. They can convince themselves that what they needed was less intensity, less emotion, less expectation, less pressure. And because they are no longer standing inside your love, they confuse the absence of emotional demand with peace. But peace built on distance is not always peace. Sometimes it is only numbness with good timing. Then life begins to move around them. Days pass, then weeks, then maybe months. They meet new people. They have new conversations. They try to recreate the feeling of closeness without the discomfort of commitment. They look for chemistry without accountability, attention without depth, connection without vulnerability. And little by little, something begins to dawn on them. What they find may be easy, but it is not deep. What they find may be exciting, but it is not safe. What they find may be attractive, but it does not stay. And that is when the memory of you begins to change shape inside them. They no longer remember only the parts that scared them. They begin to remember the parts that held them. They remember the way you listened, not for performance, not to win, not to control, but to truly understand. They remember the way you noticed shifts in their mood before they had words for them. They remember how patient you were when they pulled away, how gently you tried to bring honesty into the room, how often you gave grace where most people would have given up. And suddenly, what once felt like too much starts to look like emotional maturity. What once felt heavy starts to look like effort. What once felt intense starts to look like sincerity. Your love begins to make sense to them only after life introduces them to what love looks like when it is thin, casual, inconsistent, or self-serving. That is the quiet heartbreak in all of this. People often do not understand the value of something rare while they are living inside its warmth. Rare things do not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes they arrive as steadiness. Sometimes they arrive as someone who keeps showing up. Sometimes they arrive as a person who is willing to have difficult conversations instead of disappearing. Sometimes they arrive as emotional depth, as kindness with boundaries, as tenderness with honesty, as love that is not just felt but practiced. And because it feels calm, because it feels grounded, because it feels available, they assume it is easy to find. They do not realize that what feels steady is often the rarest thing in the world. So life starts teaching them through contrast. It shows them people who say all the right words and mean none of them. It shows them connections that feel electric for a moment and empty the next. It shows them what it feels like to be around someone who does not care enough to ask deeper questions, who does not notice when something is wrong, who does not stay long enough to build trust, who does not hold space for imperfection, fear, sadness, or truth. It shows them how exhausting it is to live in shallow waters, when once, even briefly, they had touched something real. And that is when your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Because when you were there, they had the luxury of resisting you while still benefiting from you. They could pull away and still know you cared. They could become distant and still feel your patience waiting. They could question the relationship while still being held by the emotional safety you created. But once you are gone, they lose that cushion. They lose the softness that made their confusion easier to live with. They lose the person who saw beyond their defenses. They lose the rare comfort of being genuinely cared for, even in their inconsistency. And only then do they begin to feel the full shape of what they left behind. But I need you to understand something else, because this part matters deeply. Their realization does not erase your pain. Their late understanding does not refund what it cost you to love them. It does not erase the nights you cried, the moments you doubted yourself, the ache of trying to be enough for someone who kept stepping back from what you were freely giving. It does not undo the loneliness of being present with someone who could not fully meet you there. There is something deeply unfair about being loved too late, or being understood only after your heart has already had to survive the misunderstanding. And that is why you must be careful not to romanticize their realization more than your own healing. Because yes, they may come back when life shows them you were rare. They may return with softer eyes, with heavier regret, with a deeper understanding of what they lost. They may finally see that your patience was not weakness. Your emotional depth was not pressure. Your desire for consistency was not neediness. Your love was not ordinary. But none of that matters if they still do not know how to hold it. Recognition is powerful, but it is not the same as readiness. Missing something rare is not the same as being capable of protecting it. Regret can be real and still not be enough to build a healthy future. That is why your heart has to grow wiser, not just softer, because if they come back, you must not only listen to what they feel, you must pay attention to what has changed. You must ask yourself whether this is simply someone now awakened to your rarity, or someone truly prepared to honor it. There is a difference between being missed and being chosen well. There is a difference between someone grieving your absence and someone becoming safe enough for your presence. And your life is too precious to confuse those two things. So yes, what shocks them is not just losing you, it is realizing that what you gave was rare in a world full of half-love, mixed signals, shallow effort, and temporary attention. It is realizing that real connection is not easy to find, that patience is not endless, that emotional depth is not common, and that genuine care is one of the rarest gifts a person can receive. But the deeper truth, the one that matters most, is that you must never wait for someone else's late awakening to teach you what you were all along. You were rare while they were doubting. You were rare while they were leaving. You were rare even when your love was being mishandled. And once you truly understand that, you stop chasing people to recognize your value, and you start choosing the ones who can feel it, hold it, and honor it while they still have you. You need to understand their return does not always mean they have changed, and that is one of the hardest truths for a loving heart to accept. Because when someone who once pulled away suddenly reappears, when someone who once left you in confusion comes back with warmth in their voice, softness in their words, or regret in their eyes, it touches the deepest part of you. It touches the part that waited. It touches the part that loved through silence. It touches the part that hoped that one day they would finally understand what you were trying to give. And when that moment comes, it can feel powerful. It can feel like justice. It can feel like the story is finally turning in your favor. But you must be careful, because someone returning is not the same as someone being transformed. A person can come back because life humbled them, because loneliness reached them, because disappointment found them, because other connections showed them how rare you were, and still be carrying the very same patterns that once hurt you. They can miss your warmth and still not know how to stop bringing coldness into your life. They can feel the loss of your presence and still not be prepared to protect your peace. They can say, "I see your value now," and still not have done the deep, uncomfortable work required to love you differently. And that is where so many people get broken twice. Not the first time when the person leaves, but the second time when they come back and are welcomed in too quickly, simply because their return feels like proof that love has won. But love does not win just because someone comes back. Love wins when someone returns with accountability, with emotional maturity, with consistency, with a willingness to do what they could not do before. Love wins when the same situation that once made them disappear now finds them staying. Love wins when they do not just speak from longing, but act from growth. Because without growth, a return is often just a reunion between your hope and their old habits. And hope, when it is not protected by wisdom, can make you open the same door to the same storm, simply because this time the storm knocked more gently. You have to remember what it cost you the first time. You have to remember the confusion, not just the chemistry. You have to remember the nights when your chest felt heavy because you were trying to make sense of mixed signals. You have to remember how often you questioned yourself, how often you tried to become easier, calmer, less emotional, less needy, less human, just to make the connection feel safer for them. You have to remember how much of yourself you edited in order to keep something alive that should not have required your self-erasure in the first place. Because when someone returns, the heart has a way of romanticizing the pain. It remembers the tenderness. It remembers the beautiful moments. It remembers the potential, but wisdom remembers the pattern. And that is why your healing must become stronger than your longing. Your healing must teach you to pause, to look beyond the emotion of the moment, to ask deeper questions than the lonely heart wants to ask. Not, do they miss me, but have they changed? Not, do they finally see my value, but can they now honor it? Not, is this the moment I hoped for, but is this safe for the person I have become? Because you are no longer the version of yourself who can survive on potential. You are no longer the person who can keep mistaking intermittent warmth for real security. You are no longer the person who should have to translate someone's affection into excuses just to make it feel enough. Sometimes a return is real. Sometimes a person truly has gone away, reflected deeply, faced themselves, and come back more honest, more grounded, more capable of intimacy than before. That does happen. But even then, the difference is not in the emotion they bring back, it is in the stability. It is in whether they can remain present when things get uncomfortable. It is in whether they can communicate instead of withdraw. It is in whether they can hold your heart with consistency, not just intensity. Because a changed person does not only come back with feelings, they come back with evidence. Evidence in how they speak, how they show up, how they respond to tension, how they handle vulnerability, how they take responsibility without becoming defensive, how they make your nervous system feel safer instead of more uncertain. And if that evidence is not there, then their return may only be a reflection of loss, not growth. It may mean life showed them you were rare, yes. It may mean they now understand what they took for granted. It may mean they feel the ache of your absence in a way they never expected. But pain can awaken desire without producing maturity. Regret can bring someone to your door without teaching them how to stay in your life differently. Missing you can make them reach out, but it cannot, by itself, make them ready. And readiness is what matters now, not romance, not nostalgia, not the emotional power of being chosen again by the person who once made you feel invisible. Because the truth is, being chosen again is not enough if you are still being chosen in the same incomplete way. Being wanted is not enough if that wanting still comes without steadiness. Being valued is not enough if that value is only recognized once access is lost, then forgotten again once comfort returns. You deserve more than a person who understands your rarity only in moments of loneliness. You deserve someone who understands it well enough to protect it daily. You deserve someone whose love does not wake up only when distance frightens them. You deserve someone whose care remains awake when closeness asks something real of them. So if they return, let your heart stay soft, but let your standards stay stronger. Let yourself feel what you feel, because you are human, because part of you may still care, because part of you may still wonder if this is the moment everything changes. But do not abandon what your healing has taught you. Do not let a familiar face become more convincing than the truth you fought so hard to learn. Watch what they do. Watch whether their presence feels different, not just exciting. Watch whether peace grows around them, not just hope. Watch whether you feel safe to be your full self, instead of feeling pulled back into the old habit of shrinking just to keep the connection alive. You need to understand, their return can be emotional, beautiful, even sincere, and still not be enough. Because sincerity without capacity still leaves damage behind. Feeling without change still repeats the wound. Longing without responsibility still leads to loss. And your life is too precious, your heart is too valuable, and your healing has cost too much for you to confuse someone's realization with their readiness. Let life show them your worth. Let absence teach them what they could not see when you were near. But let your own growth teach you this. You are not here just to be found again. You are here to be loved in a way that no longer asks you to bleed for the lesson.